So how's the weather? We are hitting up with snow now, which is fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, it's 36 this morning. Actually, I had to pump up the heat a little bit.
36 sounds. How's the weather? We are hitting up with snow now, which is fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, it's.
Mental note: don't have the live security podcast up in a different window when you start streaming. I was like, what did I do here? That's too funny. Well, it all worked out good though, which is great. So, the weather here is getting insane. But it's always that time of the year that I enjoy doing it. But it's always fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to some snow this year. We didn't get any really last year, and the kids were bummed. When we have snow, it's always fun. We've got a good hill up the street for sledding, and then people drive in from all over to go to that hill. And there's actually a sign there that says "Sled at your own risk." That's permanent. Yeah. Because it's the spot, and you can get a good run going. But if you don't bail out at the last minute, you may end up in the creek. Even though it's quite a long way.
During COVID, there was this one park that we had here, and it was a combination of like ice and snow. And it's the hills that I used to take my kids on all the time. And one kid actually got killed, and the second one got paralyzed, which was absolutely horrible, obviously. But that can be dangerous, but at the same time, definitely a lot of fun when you're going sled around in the snow. That's what, like, we have a group of folks, friends that we go with from Cub Scouts, and we all go sledding and all that good stuff at a different hill that isn't as dangerous. But this is the time of the year. Like, I'm starting to listen to the Christmas music and starting to get into kind of the spirit of things. And Erin, my wife, doesn't allow us to have Christmas music or lights in the house until right after Thanksgiving. So it's like the day after Thanksgiving, like it hits midnight. And Christmas is going around. I'm starting to decorate the house, and she's like, "Seriously, you didn't even wait?" Like, it's like, "Oh no, it's midnight. It's time. This is."
Yeah, similar rules here. Christmas doesn't happen until after Thanksgiving is over. So yeah, absolutely. And I get it. Yeah, it's funny because you sometimes you think this is a new thing, right? But when watching the older Peanuts Christmas specials and stuff, they're talking about the commercialization of Christmas back in 60s and 70s. Yeah. And even in the 80s, they're talking about, what are you talking about, Christmas wreath? It's not even Thanksgiving yet.
That's funny. It's amazing how culture has stayed the same throughout the years too. So you remember the movie Christmas Story?
Yeah.
The classic from the early 80s, right? And what's interesting is most of it was actually filmed here in Cleveland. Actually, all of it was filmed here in Cleveland. And they had the original Christmas Story house, and it has obviously the leg with the lamp in it. And where the casino is now used to be the old department store that they filmed the famous Santa, you'll shoot your eye out, goes down the slide, and all this other stuff. Went through this place, and when I was a kid, my dad used to actually take me to that location, and they had a massive Christmas. It was like multiple floors of like Christmas stuff, which was really awesome. And I remember they had this like futuristic robot, and it would actually talk back to you. And, what I didn't realize as a kid is there's literally a guy around the corner with a microphone, responding back to you. So I was like,
that's great.
Oh my gosh, we're living in the future. And this is like, 1985, and I'm like,
this is like Disney magic, right?
Yeah. Nowadays, you can actually have a robot obviously talk back to you, which is crazy. But, hey, we'll get started here in just a few minutes, folks. Just letting a couple people hop in here. We'll get started right at noon Eastern time. So about 2 or 3 more minutes, but we're just catching up and, BSing for a little bit until we kick it off.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find it interesting how many, especially Christmas movies, are filmed in and around Chicago.
Yeah, really.
It's like Die
Hard, right?
Yeah, Die Hard. Of course.
Yeah.
Although that was actually filmed in at the building in L.A. Apparently, that was the building owned by I think it was Fox, and so they owned the building, and they had the upper floors were being renovated. But the accountants were on the lower floor, and so they were complaining about the explosions. So that would have to be done when they're not working.
Could you imagine, like that's the complaint you get from the building owners, like there's too many explosions and people's bodies flying off the top of it. That'd be hilarious. Yeah. It's unfortunate with Bruce Willis. Like, it's one of Aaron's favorite actors, and his health has been declining, obviously, very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. But amazing actor. I pretty much love all those movies. And we just actually watched The Sixth Sense with my kids. And my one son is just ridiculously smart. And he's like, at the beginning of the movie, he's like, I bet he's dead. And I'm like, dang it, dude, come on.
Oh,
like,
so spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the movie.
yeah.
By the way.
Don't watch Sixth Sense now. I just ruined the whole thing. So.
Speaking of other movies we can ruin, the one thing that really annoyed me was the one movie that was ruined for me that I was very disappointed about. It was a big, super popular movie years and years ago. I was looking forward to seeing it. I wasn't able to get to see it until several weeks after it had been out. Of course, it was a big popular movie, so it had been out for a while, still in the theater. And I was really annoyed because people were like, yeah, the ship sinks and everyone, like half the people die. And I'm like, why are you going to spoil Titanic for me? I was looking forward to seeing that movie. Stop spoiling movies.
Listen, we should put a disclaimer on here that Titanic was going to be spoiled, at the beginning of this. But sorry for all the listeners here that we ruined the whole movie for y'all.
Well, they are 20 plus years old, 30 plus years old now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to make us feel old, Dave, but these are older movies. What other movies can we spoil now in this podcast live cast about cybersecurity?
Well, so let's run through them. So Iron Man dies, right? Dude, it was like 6 months or a year after that. I happened to mention it on Twitter, and I got destroyed. Like, are you serious? Like, I'm like, it's been 6 months. Like, there has to be a spoiler expiration here before we realize whether or not it's okay to say online, or maybe put like little spoiler tags on it or whatever. But
yeah, statute of limitations, right? If you haven't seen a movie in 5 or 10 years or 20 years,
I think 5 or 10 years is reasonable for getting rid of that. But I did hear that they are coming out with a different Marvel universe where Tony Stark is back or whatnot. Who knows? But
it's a comic book movie. No one really dies in comic book movies.
Never. He's going to come back somehow, right? That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like on South Park. Kenny is he's eternal. He's immortal.
That's right. Kenny comes back every episode. So
what's old is new again, Dave. We've got
right.
The Simpsons still on. We've got South Park still on. Apparently, Furby is one of the hottest toys, along with the Dancing Elmo. Like, I don't know what year it is, to be honest.
Just got to get Barney back and a few other ones, and I think we'll be all set. So
I'd be okay without Barney.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had numbers about that. I will say, like, one of my most iconic things as a kid was my Teddy Ruxpin, and actually I do attribute that to me getting into cybersecurity and hacking, because my parents got me this Teddy Ruxpin, and it would move its mouth and its eyes and whatnot. And it had like companions too. I think there was like a caterpillar, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. I never got those, but I had the Teddy Ruxpin, and I listened to everything. And after that, I'm like, how does this work? And my parents went, to work or whatever, and they worked super late at night. So it was like, it's funny. You look at like the 80s and 90s kids. Our parents worked till 7, 8 o'clock at night. You come home and you were home alone the whole time. Like, you had, there was no parents in the house from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. And that was okay. We figured it out. We had refrigerable, microwave refrigerable type of foods, and figured things out that way. But I remember tearing apart my entire Teddy Ruxpin, like circuit boards and everything, just to figure out how this thing worked. And I had it, all the volts hooked up, and my dad had a multimeter, and I'm sitting there figuring out like exactly how it's interpreting, the cassette tape to audio and how the speakers worked and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I think I could like do something cool with this, and so I started modifying it so it would sound like a dragon, and it had like different tones on it and everything. So I was actually modding my Teddy Ruxpin when I was like 8 years old or 10 years old. It was actually last week in my basement, but it's good.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
We'll voice modulator on it.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, we'll kick this off in 2 seconds. I just want to adjust the light here, and we'll be ready to go.
Alrighty. So welcome to Movies and Toys with Dave and Sean. This is a new feature on the live cast. Please make sure you like and subscribe.
Yeah, for sure.
And I literally think bell or something.
I literally think we could figure out like a good series where we just talk about old 80s and 90s movies, because I'm reliving all of them with my kids now. Like, we're seeing all of these really good movies. So like everything from like Ghostbusters and Back to the Future, obviously the classics.
Right.
But we just watched Super Troopers. And they're getting to the age now where we can start to watch some of the cool ones. And Gavin's now 15 and a half. He's almost 16. And so, we'll do the like kind of risky movies that might have like a couple like nudity scenes or things like that. And I'm like,
right.
So it's like this awkward pause where we're both like staring at the opposite direction, not looking at each other.
Yeah, I watched the original Clash of the Titans with kids. 1981 is when the movie was done. The special effects looks like it was from the 70s. But fans of the original Batman from the 60s, Burgess Meredith, who played the Penguin in the 60s series of Batman, was in there.
Oh
He
no.
was one of the actors. Laurence Olivier, Ursula Andress, Harry Hamlin plays Perseus. So it's the kids were kind of like, I don't know, the special effects look really weird when they released the Kraken. It just looks awful. But the story was compelling enough to keep at least them around watching. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's obviously with the newer Star Wars and things, which are all CGI, and some of the newer movies, which are all CGI. We were talking about the Marvel movies. Story still drives it, and it was enough to keep them around and watching. So that was good.
Yeah, yeah, it's good times catching those up, and for what we thought were like the most amazing graphics at the time. I was watching a thing on Facebook. It was a kid getting a Nintendo 64 for Christmas, and just the excitement, but playing like GoldenEye and all these classics back then, and just incredible times. But anyways, we digress into the talk. Let's talk cybersecurity, which
Absolutely.
appreciate having you on, Sean. And we've been friends for years, and it's been amazing to see your growth at Trimark and what you folks are doing. Why don't you give a little bit of background on yourself, intro, for the folks that may not know you, although it's pretty hard because you literally became, and here's Sean's going to blush and be like, oh, I didn't, whatever, I didn't do the same thing. But, Sean, you really became kind of the central authority around Active Directory security, Microsoft in general, and just, one of the biggest targets that we always go after as attackers is Active Directory, whether it's, in Azure or whether it's on-prem. And you really were kind of the forefront around where those main misconfigurations were, where even Microsoft had known a lot of things that have been built over, 20, 30 years of just stacking things on top of each other, and how those kind of work and permissions and the complexities around AD. And I remember, we were sitting down at the restaurant a couple of years ago before you started Trimark, and you were, talking about how you wanted to be able to help organizations with this. And it really wasn't a focus at all for many companies, because they just assume, hey, we have organizational units, we have group policies set for those, we're good to go. And we abuse that all the time as an attacker. And I'd say not all the time, it's literally every single time, right? You look at your attack surface, and it's, if you're a predominantly Microsoft shop, we're going after Active Directory. I mean, that's period. Whether it's in Azure, whether it's in mixed and hybrid, whether it's on-prem, we're going after Active Directory. So literally, it's the staple core critical infrastructure around your protection, security, and essentially, policy for your entire organization. And you saw a really big need there. So maybe get a little bit about yourself and what you folks are doing at Trimark. Because obviously I'm a huge fan, but I'd love everybody else to know too.
Well, thank you, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. So it was interesting because when the Golden Ticket talk was done at Black Hat back in 2014, Skip and Benjamin Delpy and Skip Duckwall and Benjamin Delpy did this talk talking about how you could grab, if you were able to get the password hash for the KRBTDT domain Kerberos service account in Active Directory, then you were able to forge your own Kerberos ticket, so your TGT. So basically a golden ticket to anything on the network that uses Kerberos, which is like everything within Active Directory. And after that, there were a lot of people that were like, oh, well, no one could get that hash because no one can compromise my Active Directory. So I started seeing there was a gap between what the folks that actually administer Active Directory, how they saw it, and then the pen testers and red teamers and attackers. And this gap was so huge because it was like, well, no one could get that, but then the pen testers and red teamers I talked to said they always do. So I started putting together talks around this, and certainly figured out how to detect golden tickets in use on the network. Did a lot of work behind the scenes on that, and in addition to other things that were all things Mimikatz, basically, as well as some things that were interesting to me, like unconstrained delegation, which was something that just was not well understood at all. So I started digging into a lot of different things that organizations were using, but we didn't understand why they were the way they were. Like, what does it mean when you check that box? Kind of like Active Directory certificate services today. What does it mean when we check those boxes? Nobody knew then, we know now. I like to say that the attacks that were theoretical are now practical, and those are the things that we're having issues with. Things like Kerberos staying where we have service accounts and other privileged accounts that have Kerberos service principal names or spins associated with them. And then you can just capture that information about the ticket and then hold on to it and then basically hack the password, break the password offline, which means that the attacker can take forever on that. And the things that were supposed to make this harder for the attackers really haven't, made it that harder. The thing is, like, we have firewalls. We have had firewalls since the internet. We've started connecting things to the internet. That hasn't done anything from a security perspective, at least from the perspective of protecting your internal network. And so we have to change what we've been doing. And part of what I wanted to do with Trimark was help make that difference, just like what you do with TrustedSec and also with binary defense, is figure out a way how you can make a difference. And for me, I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
I want to do something a little bit different. So when I was focused on Active Directory security, it really started coming together around what are the things that really matter from an Active Directory security standpoint, because the folks that manage these systems, they're fighting fires all the time. They're busy. They don't have time to keep up with, okay, what's the latest petted potam or curb relay up or whatever name you want to have, like Squibbly do. They don't care about that. The only thing they care about is to make sure that everything is working and that the executives and leadership and the stakeholders have access to what they need access to when they need to have it. So it's the confidentiality, the integrity and availability. They care about availability, that CIA triad. So it really comes down to empowering them to also understand, hey, there's some other things that you can do here that are relatively low level of effort. I know I don't like saying anything's easy. I like saying it's straightforward,
right?
Because nothing's really easy these days. And so what I did with Trimark, founding it about 7+ years ago,
was
I
can't believe it's been that long. Time flies.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. It's over 7 years ago. And the great thing about it, Dave, I'm very proud that we've worked with the Fortune 10 and beyond. We've worked with hundreds and hundreds of customers, Active Directory, Azure AD, and VMware now. We did add VMware a couple years ago. We have a couple members of the team that put that together, and several that are just really, really sharp in VMware. And no one's looking at VMware, which just amazes me. But from the perspective of what I wanted to do different was have a security assessment. And so what this does is it kind of fits in between what your traditional compliance and audit is, which is, check boxes, and what your pen test and red team was. And so what I wanted to do was to empower organizations with an assessment that would give them all the information, all of the issues in their environment, say, here are the things you should really be looking at. So what are attackers doing? We looked at that. We looked and talked with incident responders. We talked with red teamers and pen testers and said, what are the things you're going after? How is it usually compromise the environment? Overwhelmingly, we hear it's password attacks, password spray and Kerber roasting. That's the big ways the big ways to actually compromise the environment. We've worked with cybersecurity or cyber liability insurance companies and talked with them and done work with them. And they've said that service accounts are getting compromised all the time. That's one of the biggest ways that attackers are compromising environments. So what we did was we focused really in on those things that attackers are really doing. So, of course, what are the things that are most important for us and are the same things that should be important to organizations? It comes down to protecting those privileged accounts, making sure that they have passwords that are recent and strong. What's strong? Great question. But also making sure that they're focusing on those things that really matter to disrupt the attacker's playbook. And really, that's what my focus is, and I know that's what your focus is as well with the information that you all share, and certainly what we share at Trimark.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you look at various TTPs that come out for pretty much every single breach that's out there, right? Everything from initial access to privilege escalation, post-exploitation scenarios around lateral movement, exfiltration of data, it's all hitting AD. I mean, 99.9% of the data breaches that we see are going after the corporate infrastructure. And once you do the password spraying or you coax somebody into giving your MFA token and you circumvent multi-factor authentication, now you just have initial foothold into, let's just say, Microsoft 365, and now you're in their environment and you start to look at, what policies do they have there? What can we do from an initial access perspective? Even business email compromises, the rudimentary all the way to, some of the most sophisticated attacks are all targeting, Active Directory in some way, shape, or form, or Azure AD. And, you look at that and you say, well, that attack surface is so large, but if you historically go back to all of the data breaches in the past 10 years, they're all relatively the same as far as what they try to go after, right? They inject, into memory, and they use something like Mimikatz to, pull back wdigest or look for, hash values on the system itself that they can use to either A, grab a local administrator account that's shared across the other systems, or B, an Active Directory account that allows them access into other systems or has maybe excessive permissions on another one, or you're able to bridge over from one account to the other. And you see those attacks, and Kerber roasting, for example, and having like SPN accounts, service principal name accounts that allow you to have elevated access if you crack those credentials, because they usually are administrators on at least a handful of systems or a number of systems. The unconstrained delegation, printer spool options that you have, again, check marks that somebody might have put in place that no one knew about. And then, you look at what you're able to do with certificate authorities and the ability to abuse that, as well as Kerber roasting, silver tickets, golden tickets. But those like top 10 things are really the top 10 things. And those are the things that become, as you mentioned, I don't want to say easy, but they're relatively not hard to accomplish to fix those specific issues. And it's just a matter of focusing on those. And then it gets more complex with permissions and everything else that starts to come along with it. But if we're able to shrink that attack surface down and focus on hardening AD, you have a substantially better shot at withstanding a breach, or at least making it substantially more difficult, so that down the road, midway through their attack, you're able to detect them and then move on. And I think that's the biggest struggle that I see in most companies and organizations, is that one, they lack the visibility in AD. Two, they lack the controls in place to make it more difficult. And three, it's the same pen testing techniques with LLM-NR and multicast and NBNS. It's these password reuse attacks. It's the weak passwords or password spraying from credential stuffing. It's it's the same things that we continuously see, but because AD is so simplistic in many ways for the end user, it creates this kind of cataclysmic effect around how attackers abuse that. And AD in itself, if you had complex passwords everywhere, you were running the latest and greatest, it probably would be a little bit difficult to get into. But humans and the patterns that we create across the board around getting our infrastructure up, making systems work when maybe it's a legacy system or other things, it starts to reduce the integrity of that infrastructure. And even out of the box, AD could be very much insecure depending on how you set it up in your environment. And so what you guys have done is really taking it, as you mentioned, the Fortune 10s and others, but really taking kind of a methodical approach at looking at an organization's attack surface and say, here are the things that you really need to focus on from a prioritization perspective to address this. And one of the things that I recently learned that you folks do, which has been a need in, I think, our industry for forever, is merger and acquisitions. You look at what happened with MGM, and that's a great case, and not we won't, I don't know if they're a customer or whatever, so we don't want to talk specific here about that. But when you look at what has happened there, at least from what we know from public details, they just continuously gobble up new casinos and slap them on the network, right? And it's the integration piece that I see a lot of organizations, whether it's financial institutions, hospitals, whatever, when they're acquiring new hospitals, when they're acquiring new banks, when they're doing these things, there's not a lot of good due diligence on how that merger happens and the permissions and the conflictions that occur when you start to do that. So you folks come in and look at that from an M&A perspective and say, hey, here's the issues that you're going to run into as you start to go through this. And that's when you start getting into these multi-forest situations and subdomains. It starts to get really complex where a lot of these companies struggle. So you're really hitting a lot of the different areas that there really isn't a lot of expertise in this field. As you mentioned, even me, I previously, systems administrator, rest of my career on the offensive side. And when I start getting into group policy, it's like I'm learning a new programming language, right? It's like It's like learning C for the first time. You're like, oh my God, this sucks. There's so many things that go on that could create some integrity issues around your environment and security, and ultimately, some of the pain points that customers experience. What are some of the things that you see from M&A perspectives, but also just in general for what companies really struggle with on their corporate infrastructure?
Sure. I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen over the years, especially with those organizations with multiple forests, many of those forests have been picked up through mergers and acquisitions, M&A scenarios, is just trust. So basically the forest is a security boundary until you connect another forest to it via a trust. Now you've extended that security boundary to both of them. And at DEF CON talk years ago, I was talking about how the configuration of Active Directory leads to a lot of these issues with security. And one of the things I gave an example of, it's like if you gave someone, a friend of yours, a key to your house, well, now you're not the only one that has access to your house. Your friend does too. It's that extension through a trust, instead of giving them, access to a keypad to get into your garage, and maybe you have the garage door locked or not. So There's ways to control and constrain that, but most organizations, when they acquire another company, they just go ahead and set up a trust. They can let that organization run as they have, because often when one company acquires another, there's contractual agreements where for a year or two or more, that company that they bought has to run the way they have been, and they have to hit certain metrics. So therefore, they really can't do a lot to change it. Maybe they onboard those users directly into their main forest and all the HR systems, but they let everything else kind of be the way it is. And typically, as you know, it's maybe a week. If you get a week to do a quick pen test, to do a quick analysis of that environment, maybe it's a few days. One of the things that we've seen in organizations is these M&A environments, that's not enough. Like it's a checkbox. Yes, there was some sort of security check on it, but you know, Dave, like a few days to a week, that's not enough time to really have an understanding of what that environment looks like from a pen test perspective. So what we put together is a tool we call Trimark Vision. So we're actually doing a webcast next week for launch, where I'm going to be talking through it and demoing it and everything. And this is very specific for those M&A scenarios.
By the way, I'm just throwing it out there that you totally stole our name for our EDR product Vision, by the way. But at the same time, we stopped using that a long time ago.
You stopped using that a long time ago, so I thought it was up for grabs, Dave.
It's such a good name, and it's funny because first of all, how did you come up with the name Trimark? First of all.
Oh yeah, great question. So for me, the number 3 has always been lucky. I'm Irish, so you know the Trinity and the Catholic faith, and then also the Shamrock has 3 leaves. So for me, I was always trying to find something in threes, and so really it was going to be try something. Trinity was the first part of it, but like started looking around. And since my mom was born and raised in Ireland, immigrated over to the U.S. So for me, very tied into my Irish heritage. I'm over there regularly to visit family about every year or so. So I feel very connected to Ireland. I wanted to make sure that I had something that was Celtic or Irish related to what I was doing.
So I don't know if you know this or not, but they're opening up the DeLorean manufacturing plant in June or July in Ireland. I'm actually going to go out there and walk the DeLorean shop floor. So they made a lot of the production of DeLoreans. And so if you're in Ireland in June, July, we can hang out. So
that sounds awesome.
Yeah,
I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, but go. Sorry, I mean.
No, absolutely. So one of the things I found was that there was that the Celtic warriors were very feared by a lot of different other cultures and nations at the time, and so the Greeks actually had a name for a certain battle technique that the Celts had, and the Celtic warriors would have this situation where basically you'd have the horse-mounted warriors that would ride into battle. But the horses that were trained and the warriors that were not lucky enough to be on the horse, or lucky or not, would run behind. So you'd have this first wave of horse-mounted warriors that would ride into battle, and as they were taken down by arrows or whatever, the horses would loop back and pick up the next warrior. And so you ended up with this constant wave of warriors that were horse-mounted that were very intense. So they might not have had enough horses for everyone, but the horses would loop back and bring them in. And so the Greeks call this battle technique Trimarchasia, and so I just shortened that to Trimark.
Very cool.
So I thought it related pretty well with what I was trying to do with Trimark, which is we talk about defense in depth, defense in layers. So our approach with our customers is always, if one thing's going to fail, one of your defensive layers is going to fail. So what do you have behind that?
Yeah.
And this is the thing that we really focus on intensely with our assessments. Our assessments are a combination of custom proprietary tools. I've had red team companies that have offered a lot of money to buy our assessment tools. They're not up for sale. But we really do look at everything within Active Directory, everything in Azure AD, everything within VMware to identify what the issues are. But as we talked with the customer about that, because we layer not just the tool doing things, but people on our team who have operations experience and security experience. So they've managed, administered, secured these systems. So we have that understanding of what's harder than other things to do. So we can actually not just say, here's a priority, but here's also an approximate level of effort on how to do that. But as part of this whole process, what we're doing is looking at, okay, you have this mitigation for this issue, but if that fails, which we have to assume one thing's going to fail because that's how it typically works, then what's behind it? What's the next thing? So effectively, we work with our customers to help them build out those defensive layers. And so that way it hardens up that internal network, which often is like that soft, gooey center of the marshmallow.
The M&M.
Exactly, which is way too soft. And now we have situations where most organizations have Active Directory on-prem and they have Azure AD, now Entra ID in the cloud. Yeah. And they have these hybrid cloud connectivity, such as Azure AD Connect, now Entra Connect. And so in addition to that, there's all sorts of options like pass-through authentication, Azure AD seamless single sign-on, and there's potential security configuration issues with each of those. So as these layers come out, as security researchers publish their information, we incorporate that regularly. We do our own research. We actually released a tool about a year, at the beginning of this year, I believe, called Locksmith, written by Jake Hildreth from Trimark, who's done a number of presentations at conferences. And Locksmith is on the Trimark GitHub for free. The cool thing about Locksmith and what we're trying to do with our tools, another one we just released called Blue Tuxedo, which focuses on Active Directory integrated DNS security, is these tools don't just scan and say, here are your issues. Really what we're trying to do is go the next step, which is Locksmith identifies all the critical issues that we know about in Active Directory certificate services today. But it also gives you the information on how to fix it and takes that to one step further, which actually generates the cert-util command in most situations. So for example, ADCS has no auditing enabled by default. All the boxes are unchecked. And what is the recommended security best practice for it? Check all the boxes. Well, that's kind of a pain if you have 2 or 3 or 4 CAs. You have to open up each one of them, check all the boxes. Locksmith generates a cert-util command, for example, to go ahead and set that auditing for you. And it's free and you can download it from our site. So one of the things that I've wanted to do is not just improve the security of Trimark customers, but help improve the security of the world and the community at large. That's why I released a PowerShell script in the summer of 2020, because I was getting tired of seeing ransomware just run rampant everywhere. So we released a PowerShell script that identified, here's what these configurations are in your Active Directory environment, with a very lengthy article that's associated with it, so you can perform your own Active Directory security review. And so that way, anyone
I think you
can
demoed that.
I
think you demoed that at DerbyCon in 2019. Beyond the Easy button is your talk that you gave. I think.
The Beyond the Easy button was fun because that was like how you could actually cloak your AD environment against attackers. How to actually hide it from Bloodhound. Things like that, which was kind of cool. So this was kind of the DerbyCon talk was kind of the genesis of that. And so a lot of the talks and focus that I did was, okay, here are the more complicated, crazy, interesting things that could be done. Well, let's bring it down to what are the things that you really should be doing. We actually did a webcast a little while ago on, I think it was actually last year, on here are the top 10 things that you can do to improve your Active Directory security more quickly, like today. What are the easy things you can do? And we actually owe the community a part 2, which we'll be putting out there. But yeah, it's hard, Dave. And the situation is, if I was an Active Directory admin in 2015. In 2020, I'm not just dealing with Active Directory, I'm dealing with Azure AD and Microsoft 365. In 2023, I'm not just dealing with Active Directory and Azure AD and Entra ID and Microsoft 365. I'm probably also have Okta, and we saw what happened with that recently. Okta, so for those that didn't hear, Okta said the breach that happened a little while ago,
just 1%.
Just 1% of customers were affected by this breach. That's it. Data from just 1% of customers were touched and affected. And now, I think 100%. It was yesterday, last night, 100%. Every customer in Okta, except for the high security government customers, had some sort of data that was viewed or accessed, which I thought was very interesting. We included phone numbers.
What boggles my mind about that is that it really hasn't made much news or press as far as, this kind of staggered disclosure with you. And I understand, as you're doing incident response and you're kind of going through and trying to figure out everything that's going on, you want to give all the data you possibly can. But, Okta has had a number of major security incidents over the past couple of years. I mean, we had the one contractor that was compromised through the Lazarus group. We had a number of other ones that have come since then. And obviously, as large as they are, the integrations they have as an IDP provider for, some of the biggest corporations out there, their storefront publishing, their ability to do single sign-on across the enterprise, makes them a massive target from nation states and adversarial groups, across the board. So the threat model is like literally everybody. And to go from, 1% to 100% is mind-blowing because they work with the largest customers in the world. And I mean, there was no detections. There was no, ability to really protect against it at all. And the single IDP sources are starting to be, majorly concerning to me as far as, their impact it's having on the enterprise. But I thought that was crazy because it's not making as much news as I thought it would. I'm like, 100% of Okta customers impacted by this. That's a big frickin' deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Okta components were definitely involved in the MGM breach, potentially in the Caesars breach, based on the information that was shared. Adam Chester, TrustedSec, had published an amazing article about attacking Okta and certainly the Okta components on-prem. Something very similar that Okta does, that Microsoft does, pass-through authentication, enables authentication across disparate systems. So basically between Okta and Active Directory. And it was very interesting. Adam had a great write-up on it. I reached out to him. I said, "This is fantastic. I'm doing a talk. Can I use some of this?" He said, "Absolutely." So
Adam's
I incorporated
awesome.
it into the talk the next day at the Experts Conference in Atlanta. And I talked about that. And I had a customer, actually a Trimark customer that was in the audience, that came up to me. And he's like, I reached out to my manager right away. I said, if Sean Metcalf took this and added it to his slides the same day, then it's important enough for us to take a look at it. So kudos and thank you to Adam for doing that incredible
Dude, Adam is like one of the most humble, like smartest people that I've ever met in my life. I mean, the guy is just, he's like, it was like a year ago. He just starts picking up AI because he wants to learn, more about it, and how he can leverage it, like ML and AI in his, offensive capabilities, and just a really, really good dude. And we have a lot of folks on the research team and the red team that are continuously innovating. But that Okta one, by far, one of our largest, I would say, traction publications that we've done, over this year. I mean, it was definitely huge. Melvin just did one on kind of the trifecta around how you leverage post exploitation within Azure. I'm just gonna say Azure because I can't do it. But not intro. But the research is coming out in these areas, and this is one area that I think we all talked about. So I remember, man, this was 2014, 13. Everybody's like, no cloud. Right. Security, our own instances, can't do cloud. And all of a sudden,
even
it's like
2017, 2018, 2019,
still fighting it.
We were having customers. All the law firms were like, nope, never.
Not going to do it. And all of a sudden, it was just like one day, like, we're good now. It's fine. Yeah. But what's interesting about that is that if you look at kind of research, right, and you look at the industry as a whole, what happens is there's a lag effect. And there's a reason for it, because attackers will typically go for what's the most prominent, predominant, most researched, easiest to get into. Mm-hmm. And so there's not a lot of research done on the cloud infrastructure side. Well, they're still going to continue to leverage phishing techniques and normal ways of getting access to someone's computer, and then from there moving laterally and all this other stuff. Now you start to see, these higher end, a few years ago, you start to see more of the higher nation state adversaries doing a ton of research and focus on cloud infrastructure, right? And then you start seeing ransomware groups, so like Kaseya and other ones. Obviously SolarWinds is a big one. And going more after cloud providers as you start to look at this, and more managed service providers, one to many. And you look at attack surface wise. I mean, if I'm going to go after one person, that's great, or one company. But if I have access to 1,000 companies, 10,000 companies, 1 million companies, that is a huge problem that we're facing right now. And the research really is going into cloud. How do you grab that from an attack surface perspective? What are your capabilities there? And here's the thing, I do, talks all the time, as do you, and I always have the audience raise their hand about who feels that they have better, visibility in cloud infrastructure than they do on their on-prem, and not one person ever raises their hand, right? So, visibility, our ability to secure it, relying on the cloud provider itself, or the, provider in general, all of those things start to kind of go out the window. And this is a major issue to start to see. And Azure, by the way, being the core crux of that, as you start to look at managing your accounts, your people, your persons. And so, I want to get into vision, because I think that's really, really important. And I want to spend some time there about what you're fixing and the need in the industry for that. But I want to hit on two topics really quick. First, I love companies like yourself, and obviously we've been friends for a number of years, but our mindsets are very much the same around community. And to me, you have the same type of opinion, where I'm very blessed to be in a position that I'm in with my company and the people that I have, because of the community, right? The community gave me a lot of motivation, as well as feedback, and continue. I work with a number of my friends that from the community, right? So my companies are successful because of that. So I have a kind of unwavering loyalty to always help the industry improve, but it's always been my mission to make the world a safer place, as you just mentioned earlier. So like you folks, Black Hills, Red Siege, just amazing folks that are out there, just not for the profitability gains from a corporation perspective, or talking about a board of directors and hitting P&Ls from a PE firm. It's having fun with what we're doing because that's our passion. And you homed in on AD, and you're like, hey, there's a problem here, and you change the industry because of it, not because you're looking to make a buck, but because it was the right thing to do. And so I just want to give you kudos for that, and to John, and to all the folks that are out there doing the right thing to help make the world a safer place. And by the way, it happens to be our job now too, which is the cool part about it, right? We're having fun doing what we're doing to be able to do that. But hitting on your point around the visibility aspect of things. So I've gotten to see a few screenshots and demos, and you've walked me through Vision. What was the main driver behind that? First of all, what does it do? And then when are you releasing it, and how do I get it? Okay, so
a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
So Vision is something that I've had in mind. I've had the vision of Vision for years now. I always wanted to get to the point where Trimark could release a cloud, a SaaS version of what we do. But I felt like in order to get there, I had to see a lot of different environments, because as you mentioned, Active Directory is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. But ultimately, it's infinitely customizable. Scott on my team, Scott Blake, who's our identity security team lead person, he and I have this conversation regularly about, like, okay, have we seen all the different environments? Jake as well. Have we seen every AD that we could see? No, absolutely not, because the complexity of it is so everybody can configure it a little bit differently. I mean, we've seen environments with 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 OUs. We've seen environments with 500, 10,000, 15,000 group policy objects in a single domain Active Directory forest. Yeah.
No,
we've
thank you.
seen Active Directory forest with 77 domains. We've seen environments with dozens of trusts. And so I wanted to feel like I've seen enough. I mean, we've also assessed environments that had 900 plus thousand users in Active Directory, and also other ones in Azure AD. We actually assessed an AD environment that was over 3 million user accounts in it, because they just never deleted or just really did anything with those. So we've seen a lot of different things, and I wanted to get to the point where I knew that I'd seen enough that we could actually take that kind of corpus of knowledge, not that we keep any customers' data, because we haven't been, but the understanding of what we've seen and how we've improved our tooling in order to be able to adjust and adapt and be able to capture and analyze those environments. Because obviously an environment with 5 domains in the Active Directory forest is very different than 1 domain. One that's 20 years old is going to have a lot more issues than one that's 3 years old. So with those sort of scoping boundaries, we were able to put around, okay, this is about how long it takes to do assessment, about a month or so, a month and a half, depending on the size of the environment. But that's a lot of time, and it costs money, as we've talked about. There's a lot of organizations that can't always afford a full security assessment or a full scope pen test, for example. So we wanted to make it more accessible. And we also had questions. The most common question when we deliver a report to the customer is, how do I know that these things have stayed in place? Now, granted, Vision is a subset of what we look at from an Active Directory security assessment standpoint. Again, we don't feel like a tool can do everything that a person can do at this point in time. So therefore, we recognize that Vision is going to focus on the most important security issues in Active Directory, which includes Active Directory certificate services, which includes things like unconstrained delegation, which includes these things like accounts with old passwords and AD admin accounts that have Kerberos spin associated with it. All these things that we've talked about are things that Vision focuses on. Additionally, what we decided that was important was to provide some sort of real-world scoring based on what attackers are actually doing and what matters. So there's a combination of risk and impact, and to a certain extent exploitability as well, where we're able to show the other part that I thought was really important with Vision is not just like a forest in the console, and then you have another forest that you might not be able to look at because it would need its own instance or its own console. But the goal of Vision and what we've executed on, which I'm really proud about, is every Active Directory forest in the environment can be in that single Vision console. So that's very powerful, because now what we can do is we can correlate findings and issues across those, we can give you a hit list of these are the things you need to work on.
Oh, real time too.
Planner.
Real time.
Yeah, I mean, it's
near
real time. It's it's about once a day where the refresh happens. We're doing a launch webcast next week where I'm going through and talking through everything on Wednesday, December 6th. Everyone can go and register TrimarkSecurity.com. And so the cool thing about Vision is really providing that information up front and center. The CISO has the ability to go and see what the issues are. Global SOC, the security team has the ability to see across the entire organization, no matter how many force they have, from a handful to dozens to hundreds. But the important thing to me for Vision was to empower the operations folks, because I find that too often, no matter what security tooling is used, the ops folks are just getting things thrown over the fence to them. And I managed a large AD environment for years myself. So not getting the full information about what the issue is, why it's important, how to prioritize it, as well as some detail, is one of those things that was challenging.
Yeah. So sorry to cut off for a second there. So what I think was most impactful for when I saw it is that, when you look at just the initial configuration of AD and you start to install this, right? So it's one agent essentially that you install, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, absolutely.
And it connects back and you have this dashboard, and it's, again, near real time, so once a day. But again, AD being your largest attack surface that you have out there, one, you get those itemized prioritizations of what you need to focus on. But two, whenever you have new changes or things that are happening that conflict with each other, open you up from a security exposure, and merger and acquisitions, things like that, you have a real-time portal that is telling you what you need to focus on to address and remove those specific areas. And I know you're also I don't know if I can talk about that, so I won't say this. But you are expanding the features and functionality as time goes on to handle a larger breadth of environments. I'm trying to be vague there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we got to save something for next week.
Dave. That's right. but what you all are doing there, and what I saw from it, I was blown away because there really isn't anything out there in the market today that does this, right? And you have scripts and things like that you can run to see misconfigurations, but it doesn't get down into the level of essentially the living, breathing thing that is your Active Directory environment. And I think that's been one of the biggest misses that we have, and the ability to continuously monitor the largest attacked surface that you have in your environment is absolutely incredible. And here's the funny part about it. So, we just released MP, or Detection Engineering Platform, recently. And, our mindset with it was give a community edition version, but also make it cheap for folks to be able to, actually be able to obtain this, right? And, we could have, the Fortune 5 and Fortune 10 and Fortune 100 is like, oh my gosh, you can charge so much more. And we're like, but we don't want to, right? We want to, make this affordable for everybody to be able to do it. And you did the same thing. You're like, what's the first thing I told you when you told me the pricing? It's like, Sean, you can charge so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what you were saying, Dave. Like, you have this one life, right? You can make a difference. Yeah, I want to be able to look back and go, what are the things that I did in my life? What are the things that I changed? Certainly, I've done a lot of work, a lot of research, published a lot of information. There's a lot of things that I published, including golden ticket detection, information on how to detect password spraying of accounts, especially using Kerberos authentication, detecting Kerberosing, things like that. And many people, including members in the Trimark team, were like, hey, we could sell that. And I was like, I don't care. I want organizations to better understand what these issues are and how to fix them. And that's the thing that we really focus on at Trimark. Isn't just you have these issues. I joked recently that we're not just a security company helping improve these things, but in some ways we're providing kind of security therapy as well.
Yep.
You can fix these things. These things can be done. We've worked with other customers. We've seen these things get resolved. At every conference I'm at, I'm usually at the booth, at the Trimark booth. We'll be at ShmooCon. Looking forward to seeing everyone there. But one of the most common things that I get asked pretty much once at every conference is, can Active Directory be secured? And my answer is yes, it can. It does take work, but yes, it can. We have customers that have pretty impressive Active Directory configurations from a security perspective.
By the way, I've been to some of your customers that have that, and it's a nightmare for us. So just throwing that out there. So.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is the environments that we typically see, a third of them don't have appropriate auditing configured on the domain controller, so they're not even seeing your activity, Dave.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, if there's a root domain the root domain typically is less secure than the child domain, which has all the users and computer accounts.
Yeah.
Those are the most common things. And talking about, like, I kind of group these things that we've been talking about, from an attack perspective. We have password attacks, so password spraying, curb roasting, etc. Right? That's kind of one group. We have the situation where it's basically getting a certificate or a signing system of some sort and leveraging that to create your own access. So there's different types of that. One thing is the curb TDT golden ticket attack. One has been termed the golden SAML. I actually talked about this in 2017 at DEF CON, where if you grab the signing ticket or token from, or the signing certificate from ADFS, you could then write your own ticket to anything. At the time, I said it was just like a golden ticket. Months later, there was a tool that was released, and it later became known as the golden SAML attack. And you were just saying about how attackers are going after these organizations and companies that have all this access. And as part of the Solarigate attacks, which leveraged the golden SAML attack pretty extensively, they also identified that there was a way that many organizations have allowed access, global admin access, into their Azure AD tenant, their Microsoft 365 environment, because of the cloud service provider configuration. And so because of this delegated access, which Microsoft called delegated access permissions, or DAP, it wasn't granular. The biggest issue with this was once that customer said yes, that one group within that CSP tenant, that cloud provider tenant, had global admin access to every one of their customers. So 50, 100, hundreds of them. And that one account, which is a member of one group that applies to all of them, because that was the model that Microsoft came up with.
Yeah.
And so the Solarigate attack.
How is a normal IT admin ever supposed to understand those complexities?
Oh, no
right?
way.
Yeah, there's no way. No way.
And you know what? The way to figure out if that was configured was hidden from the UI for the most part. There was a very very archaic PowerShell commandlet in order to pull this information, but you'd have to know exactly how to do it. And then in not all cases would you actually get that information back. Something we check as part of our Azure AD security assessment, what we call our Microsoft Cloud Security Assessment. But these are the things that are hard. Just like in Azure AD, you have applications with permissions on the tenant, just like we do service accounts that are in domain admins. It's the same sort of thing. The same issues that we've had for years in Active Directory are now the same thing in Azure AD. New name, Entra ID, same issues. The problem is that admins are never going to know about these things unless they get a pen test, and the pen tester happens to use that. If they don't even have to use that, then they won't know about it. And that's why what I feel like what we do with our security assessments is special, is because we're identifying all the issues. We're identifying all the most important things that you need to know and putting that into the report, making sure you have the information, and not just putting it there to figure out, but do these things first, then these other things. And what we did with Vision is took that approach and writ that large into a SaaS product where customers can actually see what's going on. They can also see the improvements. They can see things improve over time. They can see their score improve. They can objectively compare different environments. So that way when they're doing an M&A, they get the agent installed, or they can just run a tool and upload it manually, because there's an offline mode in Vision where you can actually see and compare the two. And Vision will tell you your production environment is rated at this score, this M&A environment is rated at this, and here are the comparisons between the two across the most important areas. And that way, within 2, maybe 3 days, the customer can know what the real security issues are in this M&A Active Directory environment. And to us, that was very important because we saw that as a gap. And just like you, Dave, what you've done with TrustedSec and Binary Defense, I want it with Trimark to try to identify what these gaps are. I think the next big gap that the industry is trying to get a hold of is this newer type style of attack. Again, it was always theoretical, now it's practical, is what Lazarus, Lapsus, I think a Scattered Spider went after MGM and Caesar and others now, including Clorox. What they're doing now is they're calling up, or they're impersonating support personnel, or they're compromising the support personnel to jump into and then have access, just like with Okta.
Right.
And so we have these newer style of attacks, which are just basically social engineering, which you've done for years.
Right.
But it's a new application of it in a way that, that instead of going after the admins, let's go after the support personnel.
Which, by the way, have elevated permissions. Maybe not domain admin, but it's your foothold in to get access to the rest of your infrastructure, right?
And let's get them to approve whatever that MFA purpose is or source is. And then we just add our own MFA, and then we don't have to worry about them at all.
Yep. And that's another thing too, on the MFA side, that I'm so against push notifications. I think that should just go in a burning fire of where the hell that came from. But, that's where we see most of the errors occur. Obviously things like YubiKeys keys or one-time pins, much more safer in many cases in regard. But that goes into the policy side too, about what you allow, how you add new MFA solutions in place, and kind of the policies and structures around that. And again, when you start looking at Active Directory, it's more than just group policies. It's more than just organizational units. It's a lot of things and complexities that go into there. And you just spotted off one on the sample side that I'm sure 90% or 95 or 99% of people haven't even looked at. And gone down that rabbit hole, which is a major attack surface for most organizations and companies. So, for me, when I saw, Vision, its early stages and where it's kind of gone to now, huge necessity, huge need for that. And what I think most best about it, and I'm not trying to plug this for you for folks, but, when I see that there's a need, you and I are very much the same way. We create something or we build something to solve that need, right? With Vision, I really like what it's accomplishing because it's something that is ongoing. What I find in a lot of these fixed assessments is that you get this report and they crank through the reports and then everything's good to go. Whereas the security industry is always evolving. There's always new attack vectors that are coming out and ways that they're doing things. And so when those come out, you're building those into Vision, so the customer's automatically getting those, and you're seeing those new attack vectors go. Or again, merger and acquisition, right? And you need to see the impact that's going to have. Or things change. Somebody changed the configuration or setting that you didn't know about, which inflicts pain and suffering and agony to your AD infrastructure because you didn't know about it. We're obviously on the binary defense front side, very much on the MDR space and log sources and telemetry data, and 9 times out of 10, we always we start to see a log source that went away, and if we weren't monitoring that, we would never know that log source is no longer there. We're not able to see the data and potentially miss an entire compromise. We go to the customer like, oh yeah, we made this mistake. My bad. We have a firewall now blocking the log data, so you're not able to see it anymore. But we just fixed it. So, but those things are catastrophic to an organization because you implement the fix, and then all of a sudden there's a change in it, and it now equates to not having that visibility of those controls that you thought you had in place in the first place. So the validation piece, the reporting piece, the continuously monitoring and updating, and your ability to really have a good level of assurance on, again, the most attack surface in your infrastructure, going to be huge. So when are you planning on releasing Vision? And probably I don't know if you talk publicly about the pricing, but I thought it was very competitively priced. Not competitively, it was ridiculously cheap priced, and a good way to give that to the masses. What's great about this is I feel like as an industry, we always tailor to the Fortune 10, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000s that are out there. And so you're affording detection engineering and threat hunting and all of these to the companies that can afford that, right? But, the SMB side and companies that don't have dedicated security teams and personnel that don't know what to do, they're always left in the dark. And these are the ones that you start to see a lot of the breaches happen, or at least historically you've seen the breaches too. Now they're moving to bigger companies like MGM, Caesars, Clorox, et cetera. But, it's interesting because, this is affording, one to many that you've been able to build within the Vision. So when are you releasing it? And, give us some teasers and updates there.
Absolutely. So join the webcast that Trimark's doing next week on Wednesday, December 6th, and sign up on TrimarkSecurity.com. I'll talk about all the details, including pricing and all the fun stuff. We are signing up for early access, which we're launching in conjunction with ShmooCon. So Trimark will be all about Vision. It'll be a Vision takeover at the Trimark booth at ShmooCon January 12th.
I love
So
Shmoo.
that's when we're doing an early access launch. So we're getting customers into it. It's full production. We're very excited about it. There's tons of checks that we have queued up for it that we're adding new ones all the time, plus a long roadmap. But yeah, the goal with that is to do something, again, different, something better.
Yeah.
We're not trying to be everything to everyone, which I feel like a lot of the security products that are out there, that's what they're trying to do. Our goal
how long
is to
have you been
empower
developing?
operations
How long have you been developing
and
this for?
Empower security. It's been over 2 years.
Yeah. So I don't think folks recognize how much time and effort that you've put into this and your team has put into this. This isn't a half-assed product. This is something that you have built meticulously, and you would not release until it was, vetted by customers in infrastructure from a beta testing perspective. Been able to go through kind of the rigor more and iterate and get better on it from feedback from everybody. And you definitely did it the right way. And so when this is coming out, I mean, it's a full-fledged product with, by the way, it's going to have continuously be improved, obviously, over time as we do. But, it's been impressive to see, where it started from, where you're going now, and kind of the iterations for it. So everybody needs to tune in to that webinar that you're going to be doing on it to kind of get a lot of the good details out there. We're coming up on some time here. We got about 6 minutes. Wanted to ask you one closing question, and then we'll kind of come up from this. And I'll do a little bit of outro, how to find you folks and all that good stuff. But what are the top 5 things that you see most organizations have misconfigured in the AD environment that they should absolutely focus on priority-wise right now, today, as we sit here, going and logging in via RDP to their infrastructure right now to take a look at?
Absolutely. So the number one is knowing who the admins are. I mean, these things sound very basic and simple. The problem is that the fundamentals are the foundation of everything else. Most environments, we see that there are accounts that don't belong in domain admins, administrators, enterprise admins, those that we capture and categorize as Active Directory admins. Go through, scrutinize what those members are, check the last password change. If the last password change is over a year or two, they probably needs a password change. There's arguments and discussions about what the password should be. Should passwords never change?
Yeah,
we can get
I go
into
back
that
and forth on
another
that.
time.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the team should change more frequently with longer passwords. But just from an access perspective, you get a compromised account. If it lasts 6 months, that's much more damaging than not. But that's just my personal. Right. Yeah, but
and the thing is, like with Microsoft and NIST saying that you don't have to change passwords like ever. But there's caveats to that, and no one reads the caveats.
Right.
And one of the key caveats is protecting the users from putting in bad passwords like winter 2023, right? And so that's one of the key caveats of never changing the password. I still think that there should be a password change even if it's 2 years or 3 years. Why? Well, guess what happens? You tell everyone you don't have to change your password, and then your company gets breached, and all of a sudden everyone has to change their password. That's a big red flag. Hey, by the way, we've been compromised because we're changing the password.
Well, and I have to see too, like if you have a separate domain admin account from a normal user, a lot of times the person that's using their regular account is the same password for the domain admin account. So it's just an easy bridge and crossover from the separation of duties there too. So password management, and I hate using the term hygiene because it's been overplayed, but the password hygiene aspects of things I think is really, really important. To communicate for users, but most specifically around privileged access, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So looking at those accounts, figuring out what they are, knowing who they are, then service accounts. Service accounts are overprivileged. Service accounts are in domain admins way too often. You can get them out of there. I did an article on AD Security years ago called "There's Something About Service Accounts." Go and read that. It'll help you reduce it on your own. The other issue is with delegation, Kerberos delegation. Find what's using unconstrained delegation. Figure out how to shift it over to constrained. If you still have the spooler service running on domain controllers, don't disable it. There are way too many attacks that leverage the spooler service on domain controllers. Along with domain controllers, figure out what you have running on your domain controllers. Do an audit, an inventory of your software that's running on domain controllers, and audit and inventory those. We still find old agents. We found VNC Viewer on a domain controller in an assessment this year.
Dude, I found one that had bad. I found one recently this year that had the VNC Viewer bypass, which is like a 1999 exploit. I was like, oh my gosh! Like I just warped back. I couldn't even get the application to run on. Like I had to put in like compatibility mode. I had to like boot an older OS, and it actually worked. I was like, okay, this is impressive. But yeah, it's amazing what you find. Yeah.
So I think that's we're at 4 now. Number 5 is ensuring that anything that has the ability to authenticate or is involved in authentication or syncing, like ADFS, like Azure AD Connect, put those into their own OU and just make sure that Active Directory admins are the only ones that actually modify, can link GPOs to it. That's another thing. Group policies that are linked to domain and domain controllers. Nobody should have rights to those except for your Active Directory admins. Far too often we find domain controllers where server admins or someone else, some other group has the ability to modify those. Those groups inevitably have a user account or something like that. If you have a privileged access management system like CyberArk, that counts in there as well. I can't tell you how many times pretty much every time that we found CyberArk or a privileged access management system there, we figured out a way how that could be compromised just by walking through where it is in the OU structure and how permissions flow down to it and how group policy applies.
Well, Lazarus was able to use the Thycotic password access manager to compromise, all of Uber, right? So definitely an important one from a
and because they found the
PowerShell
password for that in a share, like I can't talk to that specifically. But it's hygiene. The hygiene of these systems. You shouldn't have passwords out there when you have a password vault. Especially something that has the ability to do API key exchange with like all you have to do is give the script an API key and it can talk to the password vault and get that credential to use at that moment. That's one of the standard things that these have now. So. The other thing I would say that's really important is that when you're hybrid, understand what you're connecting. So things like the Okta synchronization, Azure AD Connect, pass-through authentication, those systems open up and change your security posture. Scott Blake on my team did a great webcast just a few months ago where he talked about how over time the complexity of the environment, the security of the environment, complexity goes up, security goes down because we've added these things. We've added these things because they matter and we need them, but there's unintended consequences. And I talked last year about the identity nexus and how we've connected these systems. So Active Directory, Azure AD, AWS, Okta. We have VMware on-prem. We've got Azure, GCP, AWS in the cloud. All these things have interconnectivity, and we have unintended consequences with the way that we have enabled operations and administration of these systems. And it's important to understand what those are. I would say as a closing thought, the most important thing that any organization listening to this can do is figure out your authentication flow. How does someone log on and authenticate to an important system in your environment, whether that's Active Directory, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Workday, Salesforce, whatever is the critical system in your environment. How does that work? And are there MDM systems that are involved where they don't have to MFA? Where do they have to MFA and where don't they? And then challenge those assumptions, because I guarantee you the attacker understands your authentication flow way better than you do.
Yep, absolutely. Well, those are amazing tips from that infrastructure piece. And, there's obviously the nitty gritties and details and things like that come out of, those types of things that allow you to really build a better security posture across your entire enterprise. Sean, really appreciate you coming on. I just want to give a quick plug to Trimark. Listen, top folks in this industry. I mean, you have specialized and found your niche and being the best at what you do. And it's funny because, we talk all the time and, you're homed in on these areas, on making sure organizations are protected. And it's kind of your mission statement. So, Trimark has a number of folks on the consulting side that come in, look at your AD environments, look at VMware, look at, your overall security posture and really help you build and sustain this complexity that we see with Azure AD and with AD on-prem, as well as, pretty much your entire enterprise, right, from a Microsoft and Active Directory perspective. So, huge group of folks there that do amazing work. I know many of them, and just you happen to have the best caliber, I think, of folks that are literally in the industry, and especially in the specialization here. And then obviously with the addition with what you're doing with Vision, I'm really excited to see the launch. I know I'll be implementing it here at TrustedSec. One of those things that I think is just really cool, what you've been able to build over the past 7 years, which again, I can't believe it's been 7 years. So, but one, let's just do another really quick plug. Let's outro with, again, the webinar. So speak a little bit on the webinar, time frames and place, where they can find you, and, ultimately we'll close it out from there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, go to TrimarkSecurity.com to register for the webinar. We also have TrimarkVision.com if you're interested and want to get a personal demo, more information. Happy to set that up for you. I'm Pyrotech3 on Twitter, X, so PYROTEK, number 3. So you can follow me if you haven't already. Occasionally I post something tech related. Sometimes often I post random things. But yeah, the Trimark team, follow Trimark at Trimark Security. We publish a lot of free information, tooling, and things that are helpful. In fact, Jim Sikora on my team, he published a 30-page white paper on how to improve Active Directory security more quickly. That's available for download at hub.trimarksecurity.com. No registration required. If you want to reach out to us and talk about what we do, absolutely, but we're not going to force you to register for something that will help you secure your environment for free.
Awesome. Well, Sean, thanks so much for coming on today. And, always a pleasure to catch up with you, man. And thanks for all you do to make the world a better place and safer place. And for the whole team at Trimark, definitely need to check Sean and his team out. We have leveraged them. We've seen their work. We've gone on to customers that have their work. And I can tell you the resiliency and the improvements that you see from these type of things are absolutely incredible. So appreciate your time, dude, today. And always great to see you, man. And, thanks again for coming on. And thanks, everybody, for listening and tuning in.